Oh dear God. Anne Hathaway giving dark, unhinged Carol Aird energy is my own personal brand of lesbian catnip. The Anne Hathaway playing a sapphic drought has finally ended, and we have been thrown a crumb. Crumb which I will lick off of the floor. It's like I went to drama school and no, it's not. It's embarrassing either way, I think. And yes, I will take all and any sapphic Anne Hathaway crumbs that are thrown at me, because that woman is a beautiful work of art, and I appreciate beautiful works of art. I do. I've seen a lot of people make comparisons between this film and Carol, and I mean, sure, in the sense that both films have sapphic longing and blonde wigs and are both gloves off, one literally and one figuratively. But apart from that, oh dear God, please adjust your expectations. Hi guys, welcome to a video, and in today's video, I'm just going to be reviewing the 2023 film Eileen, based on the novel of the same name by Otessa Moshfegh, a novel I read in less than a day because it's very easy to read, but also I guess I'm just a sucker for repressed sapphic desire. It takes me back to my youth. It does. If you're not familiar with Eileen, it's about a young secretary who becomes enchanted by Rebecca, the glamorous new psychiatrist at the prison where she works. Their budding friendship soon takes a twisted turn when Rebecca reveals a dark secret. As a heads up, this video will contain spoilers, so if you have not seen the film or read the book yet, you have been warned. Now let's get into it. So the thing that stood out to me the most when watching Eileen was the amount of artistic care that was taken with it. I found the film so visually intoxicating. The thoughtful cinematography and mise-en-scène very much contribute a narrative of their own, as well as build characterization, and there's a lot of careful artistic choices which create visual parallels and symbolism all throughout the film, making it a very visually intriguing and delicious piece of work. As well as this, the tones and colour palette, accompanied by the grainy look of the film, work to reflect the muted state of Eileen's life, the atmosphere of uneasiness and repression that builds throughout the film, and they also complement the grimier aspects of it too, because the essence of Eileen is grimy. That's its trademark. And I thought the film did a good job of capturing and conveying that essence visually. Speaking of Eileen's grainy look, as a fun fact, the production looks as though it was shot on film, but it was in fact shot with mini digital cameras and then made to look as though it was shot on film, which I found interesting. Just in case anyone else was curious about that, because I was curious about how they got it to look so beautifully vintage. Similar to the book, the film really doesn't shy away from portraying the darker unspoken realities of life or of having a female body, which is one of its more unique aspects. Because when it comes to representations of young women on screen, they're often presented as polished and usually adhere to patriarchal standards of beauty with the aim of making them palatable and sexually appealing. Very rarely do we see women, particularly young women, and their bodies presented in such a complex, dark, violent, filthy, and essentially human way on screen. Those realities are usually omitted or glossed over in film, whereas Eileen really brings all of that mess and dark human complexity to the forefront with its female protagonist. So it might sound like it's a really odd thing to say, but it's very refreshing to see such a grimy, disgusting, and flawed female character on screen. The film is, of course, nowhere near as grimy and explicit as the book. It's very much a diluted adaptation, but to be fair, considering the visual aspect of film, it's understandable why they would dial certain things back for the sake of the audience and their eyeballs. Pitfalls. I actually thought it was quite ambitious to create an on-screen adaptation of the book because it's composed of so much interior monologue and stream of consciousness. Plus, Eileen is such an unreliable narrator. All of that can be really difficult to translate visually or even verbally in a way that's appropriate for film, even with the best actors. However, for the most part, despite the dilution of the more grittier aspects of the book and the changes they made here and there, I do think the film is more or less faithful to the book. To be honest, both the book and film have their own unique charms and pitfalls, which are so shaped by their respective mediums, it's difficult to compare and contrast the two fairly. But in terms of how the film serves as an adaptation, I thought it was a good effort. I very much appreciated the film's score. I thought it was very beautiful, and there's some really thoughtful song choices which are implemented at certain points in the film which really shape your perception of what's happening on screen, particularly romantically, and that's very much something that stood out to me when I was watching the film. But above all else, the most impressive thing about this film is the casting. Thomasin McKenzie just embodied the role of Eileen completely and gave such a stunning performance in each and every scene. The character of Eileen is a repressed young woman going through such inner emotional turbulence with her father, her work, her sexuality, her sense of self, and is essentially a human melting pot of emotions ready to boil over at any minute. And Thomasin was able to convey so much inner life and turmoil in the subtle manner that the role required. And Eileen is a showcase of her talent. Anne Hathaway also came through in the role of Rebecca, and I was enamoured with the small touches and emotional subtleties she brought to the character, as well as the second language she spoke with Thomasin, which really set the tone of Eileen and Rebecca's relationship. I do think Rebecca was a lot less defined as a character in comparison to Eileen, and obviously she had a lot less screen time, but nonetheless it was impressive how Anne Hathaway managed to deliver so much in her performance in such a short amount of time. And Eileen is a film which is very much about what's going on under the surface at all times, and all of the actors understood that 100%. Every single actor in this film just gave such an incredible performance. There's really not one weak link in the entire cast. I think my favourite part of the film is when Rebecca reveals to Eileen that they're actually in Mrs. Polk's house and she has Mrs. Polk tied up downstairs. Anne Hathaway's delivery of that line is just chef's kiss. I had chills. Again, I saw this film before I read the book, so I did not see that twist coming, and it was 10 times more exciting. As for the sapphic aspect of the film, I really wasn't expecting much going into it, but I ended up being pleasantly surprised. The romance element between Eileen and Rebecca is fairly overt from the minute that Rebecca arrives on the screen, but really the magnetic connection between the two of them is really sold by Anne and Thomasin's performances. Again, these subtle emotional touches that they deliver in their scenes together is really what makes their connection believable, because there's not actually a lot of screen time dedicated to exploring their dynamic or building up their relationship. So really both actors had to summon up that kind of connection immediately for the plot to be somewhat feasible. And luckily they managed to do so. The bar scene in particular was so much more than I was expecting. It was very rich in romantic sapphic imagery. There's deep talks, there's intense eye contact, there's slow dancing. The longing is off the charts. And there's even a kiss. And I think that, combined with the lyrically suggestive music in a lot of their scenes, makes it very hard for their relationship to be perceived as anything but romantic. And I appreciate that the film didn't make the nature of their relationship super ambiguous, because they certainly could have done. There's even a love declaration from Eileen on her second time hanging out with Rebecca, which, after one kiss, relatable. Interestingly, in the book, even though it's clear that Eileen has a romantic interest in Rebecca, they don't kiss. Eileen doesn't tell Rebecca that she loves her, and she also doesn't wait for her at the end either. So they purposefully constructed the romantic element on screen in a much more explicit way, which I think was necessary in terms of succinctly conveying the intensity and true nature of their connection to the viewer. Since the film doesn't have the capacity to explore and portray the complex and contradictory nature of Eileen's desire and longing for Rebecca that was present in the book, I actually think that for the most part, the ways in which the film deviates from the source material is an improvement. For example, making Eileen and Rebecca's relationship more explicitly romantic made a lot more sense with regard to Eileen being so completely captivated by Rebecca and, in the end, putting everything on the line for her sake. And also the choice to have Eileen be the one who shoots Mrs. Polk was much more in line with her characterization up to that point, and also lends to her character development of taking things into her own hands. Whereas in the book, I felt that Rebecca accidentally being the one to shoot Mrs. Polk instead felt somewhat contrived and a little weak. I think the only change that they made from the book that I don't like is, in the film, Rebecca's hair is blonde and short, but in the book it's red and it's long. And it seems to me that they specifically styled Rebecca's hair after Carol Aird from the film Carol, and I suspect that this was either to do with wanting Eileen to have associations with Carol because it could potentially help with marketing and audience appeal due to the sapphic elements and associations between the two. Whilst I personally appreciated the unhinged Carol Aird fantasy, and will be the first to admit, if it was a marketing ploy, it worked on me, I felt that ultimately it took away from the uniqueness of the production and elicited unnecessary comparisons between the two. Did I contradict myself? Probably. I just think be your own production. So because of the overt romantic elements in Eileen, I think it's fair to label the film as a sapphic one. However, this is not a love story. It's a story about a young woman freeing herself from the life she has become trapped in and becoming a quote-unquote main character instead of simply existing on the sidelines. And Rebecca is just a tool to help her get to where she needs to go. Honestly, in a lot of ways, as I said earlier, Rebecca is not as defined a character as Eileen is. She does read as an assemblage of other people's desires, / a narrative tool as opposed to a real person, which is exactly the same in the book. Anne Hathaway does breathe a lot of life into Rebecca, but she was only able to do so much with the few scenes that she had, and I do feel like the film would have benefited from giving her more screen time just so that we got a better sense of her and her connection with Eileen, because that connection is essentially what the plot revolves around. To be honest, all of my criticisms of the film revolve around the pacing and structure. The pacing starts out okay, but it does become stagnant in places, which felt slightly frustrating, and I felt like they could have structured the plot a lot better than they did, because the film does feel repetitive in some places and then rushed in others. The ending also felt very anticlimactic and underwhelming, and it's not necessarily what happened in the end that was underwhelming, it was the pacing and structure around it that made it feel that way. When the film finished, I was kind of just sat there like, oh, okay, what was the point? Not that a film has to have a point, of course, but even still, Overall, So whilst I can appreciate the film from an artistic perspective and very much personally enjoyed the romantic sapphic imagery and darker elements it had to offer, ultimately I do feel as though Eileen is a production which had all of the ingredients to be a masterpiece, but because it wasn't prepared correctly, ended up as half-baked. The film is an experience and I'm glad that I saw it, but I don't think I was really captivated by it in the way that I was expecting to be. It's a gorgeous body that's missing a heart, and therefore it was difficult to connect to. But hey, at least the body was nice to look at, and that is what the ladies say about me. I mean, I wish they said that. A good note to end this video on, I think. Okay guys, if you've seen Eileen, let me know your thoughts on it down in the comments section below. Don't forget to subscribe for instant disappointment, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye.